Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. All right, I want to make sure everybody's awake here. I am great and happy to be back in the Tri-Cities. I was looking forward to Chris Watkins' great 400 days a year of sunshine, but unfortunately I landed to freezing rain and ice. So we haven't seen the sun over in Puget Sound for a couple months. So Barbara, I can't use that solar phone recharger over there. Barbara also talked about alcohol being able to be purchased in stores. I thought it would be appropriate to share. Marijuana now is a legalized, or about to be a legalized, manufactured good in the state of Washington. And in fact, on Tuesday, the state of Washington had a meeting on it. 200 people showed up trying to figure out what does this mean. And actually in our world, in the business community world, it's a great concern to what does it mean to your workforce. How do you and can you test that substance in an employee stream? How and when can you terminate an employee if it's in there and it's not a part of your code of conduct and behavior? But on the business side, there are a lot of folks who are looking at it opportunistically, as you might think, about how do you create growing farms, how do you distribute it, and how do you transport it as well. So, you know, it's kind of interesting to come back and talk about the Tri-Cities economy, but you know yourselves how well it's been over the past couple of years. As a reminder that in Washington State and in the country, at one point you led the country in job growth. And at one point, you not only led the region, but led part of the country in new home starts and led part of the country in housing gains as well. So I'm glad to be back here. I do have only 24 slides compared to a presenter that's going to have 67 coming up. I won't mention his name here in a few minutes. So Glenn, thank you for giving me a couple extra minutes to fly through here. Let's talk specifically, though, about Washington manufacturing numbers. This is for 2012. And so I've done two things on here, showed you the Washington numbers and the Tri-City regional numbers, the broader regional numbers. And clearly what you see in manufacturing is a higher wage base. If you look at the state average of $77,000 compared to non-manufacturing wage base of $56,000, these are phenomenal jobs. Same here in the Tri-Cities. Interestingly, that the manufacturing sector in 2012 led the state economy in job growth. That's buoyed throughout the entire state. All pockets, by and large, in all regions, saw continued and positive growth in the manufacturing sector. Specifically, it's a $132 billion impact. Now, what does that mean? Guess how large the state budget is? Throw a number out. $33 billion. So that's the entire state budget is $33 billion. Manufacturing, $132 billion last year alone. It's hard not to talk about manufacturing and not to talk about the Boeing Company. Two important pictures and visuals on here ending 2012 was the fact that Boeing was successful in getting both the 747 Intercontinental and the 787 Dreamliner out and in service. As a region, of the 174,000 employees Boeing employs, 84,000 of them are here in Washington State. They have an average wage of $84,000 a year, and Boeing in Washington State has a payroll of $6.8 billion. Comparable, Washington State's payroll is $7 billion, as Glenn just showed you. So this is a huge driver in our state. They added 50,000 jobs last year at the Boeing Company, corporately speaking. So they are a major player in our state and are going to remain a major player. Interestingly, there are 700 suppliers in Washington State that supply the Boeing Company, 5 of them right here in the Tri-Cities. All of those that have Boeing contracts are having a hard time fulfilling the Boeing contracts because if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, this is the backlog in production that Boeing has for airplanes. And I'm specifically going to point out the 737 line. Has anybody ever been to Renton and seen where they make the 737s? Raise your hand. That building has not changed in 10 years. But 10 years ago, they produced how many 737s, do you think? 9 a month. January of this year marked going to 31 planes a month in the same existing facility. Requires a dynamic workforce. Certainly the composites have changed. In the old days, a 747 had over 2 million rivets in it. Remember now we're going to carbon composite fiber systems as we move forward. But interestingly, Boeing will need 10,000 engineers in the next 5 to 8 years. 10,000 engineers. The state produces 500 engineers a year through all of its education system. They predict to have 140 to 170,000 employees by 2020 that need some type of post-high school degree. And I say post-high school because the trades are a critical part of their employment scheme. And their work with the community college system is critically important to find the right workforce with 2-year degrees. In fact, Boeing now has a strategy where it goes back to the high school level. This is back to about the 60s, where in the 60s they would go to the high school and say, if you're willing to come to work for us, we'll give you a degree and a lifelong job. And that's what Boeing's having to do today to attract its workforce. Aerospace in general, though, is getting more and more competitive. And why should we be concerned? Because Boeing made a major investment in South Carolina, opened a 787 Dreamliner production facility there, and that South Carolina has made it very enticing for them to come there. So we need to continue to be thoughtful about where does Boeing go in general. But secondly, we need just to be aware of who all is playing in that space. I mentioned the 700 suppliers just a minute ago. One of the great things about those suppliers, and we hear a number of stories today, is that while they are an original supplier to Boeing at 90%, today they've diversified to support the Airbus industry that's producing planes now in the United States, Embraer down in Brazil, and others. So a benefit to the suppliers have seen the opportunity to supply more products to more aerospace companies going forward. How did the major manufacturers that are publicly traded in Washington do at the end of 2012? They ended on a strong note, and they ended in the top percentile in general. This is their stock ticker prices in the range on the 52-week high and the 52-week low. But as we come back home and talk about what's happening in Tri-Cities and what's happening in Washington, a couple things to know real clear. First of all, talking about Seattle and the challenges they face. How many of you have followed the fact that they want to build a new basketball arena down in the Soho, the industrial market? A lot of you. One of the challenges is that goes forward, the price of land goes up. And as the price of land goes up, transportation challenges become more and more real. What will be Seattle's loss will be Spokane's, Tri-Cities, Vancouver, and Everett's gain. Manufacturers are having a hard time remaining in Seattle. Between the cost of doing business, the cost of housing for their employees, the transportation infrastructure, not only for their employees, but getting their goods to market, is a real bear. In fact, Boeing and PACCAR both do not move any equipment during the day on I-5. They move all of their equipment from plant to plant at night just because they can't afford the time and the cost to do it during the day. So it's a real issue. And innovation zones, as you know, right here in Tri-Cities, are becoming an important asset, an important economic development tool going forward. There is a need for about 14 million square feet of economic development and new manufacturing space through 2030. There happens to be a great place called the Tri-Cities that has a lot of land available. You heard from DOE today about shrinking their footprint and working with Tridec to hand over that land space there. Today in Washington, there is only one place in the state that has what's called a mega site, 800 acres that are developable and shovel-ready right now over in Wallula. Only one place in the entire state for major manufacturing growth. The Hanford opportunity provides you a great opportunity to move forward in that. And Governor Inslee's talking now about carbon footprint. In fact, you'll probably see a carbon tax come out of the legislature. Well, your energy park is carbon neutral. And I know the folks that are working there have a very strong carbon focus to that as they go forward. I think you'll see the carbon issue in general a very hot issue as we go through the legislature this session. So exports. I know Don Slight's going to talk a little bit about this, about ag, and at the end of his slides, but we are the third most trade-dependent state in the country. Yes, it helps that we produce small things like Boeing airplanes and Microsoft computers, but it's much more than that. Specifically, the agriculture industry has led our state outside of aerospace in exporting. And the new trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea has certainly helped us do that. I find it staggering that we export nearly $53 billion of goods annually. That's, in my mind, a staggering number. We also had a chance to survey manufacturers about what are their predictions going forward, what are their challenges that they see, and before you is a slide survey that comes out of the McGladrey Corporation Survey Monitor. About 1,000 companies participated in it across the country, 400 here in Washington alone. As they look forward, this goes to Barbara's report about, I'm going to be a little bullish about where manufacturing is going. She thinks they're going to be up 5%. I think manufacturing is going to be between 7 and 10% this next year. 36%, though, report that they are currently thriving or growing. 57% are holding their own. This is a big significant jump since 2008 and 2009 where manufacturers were very cautious. There's still a great degree of fragility in the economy and still a great degree of concern going forward. But there's a general sense of optimism about moving forward. Here's the employment situation numbers, and I think if you can see those numbers pretty good. The blue is what's called, if you're a durable good, and the green is non-durable good, and this is the total amount of employment. And then it shows you what the unemployment rate was coming through the end of 2012. So we were flat at the end of 2012 as we were through most of 2012, around 7.9% employment rate. The concern here for us, not only in manufacturing but workforce in general, is the number of folks who just gave up looking. And if you add that number in there, we're in the high teens for an unemployment rate today here in Washington State. The sectors that had the largest growth going forward, you can see here on the slide, but certainly centered around transportation and what I would call heavy manufacturing. They had significant job growth. This is a national number, not a state number, but we saw 4 categories that added more than 100,000 jobs in 2012, in the 2012 time period going back to 2009. Interestingly, when you talk about the top states for manufacturers, look at this list closely and recognize there's really only one list in the Northwest, and this is the list that Carl competes with on a regular basis, trying to attract manufacturers to the state. Washington ranks number 6 for job creation in manufacturing. Specifically, when we look at our state profile, our job growth rose 1.6% in November, and then for a year ago, and the national job increase rose 1.4%. Again, that goes back to the fact that we find manufacturers being more optimistic at a local level about the economy and therefore are making some hiring. But the piece that surprised me is at the very bottom, that in 2012, there was $279 million of venture capital put in place in Washington. Now you're going to see some slides here in a few minutes about the great concern about uncertainty at the federal level and the state level about taxes and all. But this is a number that surprised all of us when we looked at the tabulations coming out of the survey, that we saw nearly $280 million in venture capital, a 90% increase in 2012 over 2011. Don't ask me why. We don't have an answer to that yet. We're still looking for what's driving that. But here's going to be some of the indicators as we go forward. Here are the number of companies by manufacturers, distributors, and all others that are optimistic and thriving and growing. And here's where Washington comes up in that picture as well. We are less optimistic about thriving, but more optimistic about holding our ground and staying flat. And then when you look at the increase in U.S. sales, this is a number that surprised a number of us to see that here in Washington, only 61% saw growth in U.S. sales over last year. And if they look ahead, only 68% think there's going to be stronger growth in U.S. sales. This goes back, we think this has a correlation back to that export number. Washington led the entire West Coast in exporting for 2012, and we believe more of our manufacturers saw growth in the export market than they did in the U.S. market. This is also an interesting level when you look at what the number of manufacturers are holding on to inventory. We've talked about just-in-time production, just-in-time arrival of goods and services. This number echoes that manufacturers are holding on to less and less today in their inventory streams, and therefore, if something is a hot commodity, they have a slower lag time to getting it to market. And then the piece that we really haven't talked about today is the skills issue. We find a number of our manufacturers struggling to find, and we find in our businesses in general, the right skilled, trained, and educated workforce today. Today we have a number of 10,000 openings in Washington State alone across all companies with open positions that they can't find the right skilled, trained, and educated workforce to go to. So whether it's Schweitzer Engineering Laboratory in Pullman that has 400 jobs open right now on their website, to Janicki Industries up in Cedar-Woolley, there's a real challenge finding the right skilled, trained workforce today, let alone you look at the issues of the boomers starting to retire. Boeing's number of needing 10,000 engineers, they need 50,000 total employees over the next 7 years in general, just in addition to their engineering gap that they have there. So we find a number of folks that are reaching down to great community colleges like CBC and others to solve their workforce training needs. Having not only lived here in the Tri-Cities but being away, CBC is a gem for Tri-Cities. It's a gem about solving real worker solutions. It's a gem in partnering with you to put in training programs to meet additional needs and growths that you have in your industry. I'd encourage you, if you're not partnering with the CBC, to look to CBC and talk about how you can partner with them. When we inventoried our manufacturers about where they're going to spend money next year, it's all about IT. Folks have decided to not make IT investments for the last 2 to 3 years. I think we've seen that log jam now is coming up, and folks are ready to make that major investment in technology going forward. From the National Association of Manufacturers, this is their forecast nationwide for growth in manufacturing as it relates to GDP. I will tell you that before the fiscal cliff punt, they were thinking it was about a 1.1 to 1.6% growth. They've notched these numbers up to about 2% growth for 2013. Interestingly, in their survey of manufacturers across the country, when they talked about their business outlook and how strong they were on the economy, the concerning thing in the fourth quarter is 51% of them thought the economy was going to be strong in the fourth quarter of 12. Look at what it was the first quarter of 12 at 88%. So nationally, there's a sense of concern in manufacturing. So why are they concerned? Here are 3 questions that they were asked. Their greater concern is the political climate and the inability of our elected officials to solve the major tax, the major regulatory, and the major fiscal challenges that are in front of them. Second is health care. How many have seen their health care, their companies go up more than 10% in the last 4 years? Raise your hand. Health care is a driver. Health care is a major challenge for companies today. Washington will open its exchange for business later the third quarter of this year. Many of our members are trying to figure out what does that mean, how do they get into it, and what are the costs associated with it. But interestingly, when you read this question and you read this answer, the number one issue that most manufacturers and most companies have is how does Congress get its hands around the federal debt and tackling the big deficit type of items that are in front of you. So this is the survey participation time. How many of you are optimistic that your company is going to have a solid 13? Raise your hands. Solid 13. How many of you think you're going to have a flat 13? And how many think 13 will be a softer year than last year? Okay. How many of you believe that Congress will be able to handle the federal debt and tackle that issue in the next year? Raise your hand. Recognizing that 50% of the legislature is new, 92% of the cabinet is new, and you have a new governor, how many of you believe that the state will get its issues in order by the end of this first session? 2 hands. So now you wonder why we are polarized a little bit about what's going on at both the national and state level. I think that begins to tell you. So because of that, here's where manufacturers are. 62% of them are reducing their outlook for 2013. Not because of things that they control, but things that they can't control. A number of them, 49%, are going to reduce or slow down major capital investment. Again, this staggers us that there was $297 million of venture capital put into Washington last year, yet we see 49% of folks are going to slow down their major investment as they go forward. And then last but not least, relative to big-time budget items, we all need to be worried about sequestration, and what does that mean? We have in Washington State 120,000 members of Department of Defense employees spread across the state. And what does that mean to us? Well, we know that in March of this year, Congress must tackle the sequestration piece of the defense budget, or the cuts automatically kick in. So what does that mean for Eastern Washington? Probably the biggest piece is that the 767 tanker for the Air Force, Spokane is one of 4 regions to get it. There's a chance that that project may be put on hold for a period of time. Joint Base Lewis McChord has swelled by 15,000 troops in the last year. There's a great degree of risk of seeing not only the Department of Defense, but the active duty personnel cut there on the west side. So what do we do to remain competitive? The number one thing we hear from our members, and you have 2 great PUDs in this region here, is how do we keep base load power affordable and accessible to companies? If you are a heavy manufacturer, you're making chips, you're welding, doing heavy manufacturing and heavy welding, your power rates are critically important. Next, you need to have a consistent regulatory process to go through at all levels. We hear the frustration of local, state, and federal levels that the regulatory process is a challenge. Third is that you have to have the right skilled, trained, and ready-to-go workforce. We believe that the workforce is going to be the biggest challenge facing our employer community going forward. Where do they find the people? How do they have the right skill sets? And can businesses compete for them to get here? And last but not least, tax incentives work. Carl can tell you about that as he recruits companies from different states to here. We have a limited set of options here in Washington State to recruit companies to, but the R&D tax credit and others play a critical role in doing that. So I'll just wrap up by saying it's great to be back home. I wish it was a sunny 45-degree day. I'll take the day that we have here today. Manufacturing is doing well, but manufacturing are concerned about their workforce. They're concerned about getting their products to market, and they're really concerned about how do they continue to export at a high-level rate. We're fortunate that a number of our egg producers here are leaders in that exporting arena. So if you have any questions, see me afterwards. Thanks for having me back home.